Well, hello again, Internet. So nice to see you. Once again, I hope that sound and light is coming through clear and good. So, I wanted to give a bit of a quick talk here. What happens when goals and reality don't match? Specifically, when goals and active milestones or results are not syncopated. They're not working the way one had planned or expect to move. Now, this is important in many different fields, really all fields of work and even study and other activities, sports, exercise, whatever, diet, you name it, hobbies, doesn't matter. Right? What happens when, well, obviously, in this case, we're talking about how it's related in marketing of goods or services or even information. What happens when you set initial goals, maybe you send messaging out about it to small groups, customers, prospects, leads, or maybe you're spreading that information to other kinds of people. Maybe you work in the government, in the Ministry of Information, or you work in broadcasting, and you have to spread the goals to the people, whatever it might be, for your media network or for your government department. Right? Maybe you're a government communicating goals or certain actions, right? Could be domestic, could be foreign affairs, could be international, whatever it might be. What happens when those goals do not meet the actions? Well, we have very clear examples of that happening right now. I'll just walk past this noisy part here, getting clear of the weed whacking noises, and we'll bring you up to date. As you can see here, the clearance is ongoing. The weed whacking is active, and what was once a nice tall field of these plants, not field but side of the ravine of these plants, has now been mowed and reduced back to the ground. So anyway, so I guess they're matching their goals with their results, you could say, of clearing the weeds, of mowing the grass, so to speak. Once in a while, they got to do that. Now, what happens when, in a real field, for example, active combat that's happening right now in Gaza, does not match the initially announced goals of the government that said that the state of Israel is at war with the Hamas, and that the goals are for the Hamas to be defeated and for the hostages to be freed. Well, as I said from the beginning of this war, it looks like it is going to be doubtful that the war will end the way that it was initially announced by Prime Minister Netanyahu. It looks increasingly like that's going to be the case, that it will end differently than what he promised. And that is no surprise, since wars usually do end a little bit differently than people initially think they will, because certain unexpected events are almost inevitable. And of course, as I said from the outset, political pressures will eventually take hold, and Israel will be, as much as possible by the international community, denied the right to win this war. Even though every other country in the world that engages in warfare at some point either gets a truce that leads to peace with its neighbors. When it comes to Israel, the international community, frankly, hates Jews and does not want Jews to have control over their own sovereignty, even though the Jewish people have a nation to call home since 75 years and have every right to defend themselves like every other nation. And when they are attacked, they have every right to counterattack. And if that means that a war is launched against them, they have the right in Israel to launch a counteroffensive and keep that war going until their goals are met. However, we see time and time again since 1948 that Israel is consistently restrained from reaching an outright victory and is continually forced to accept a truce or a ceasefire that does not lead to peace with its neighbors. And that's for a simple reason, as I've just explained. Unfortunately, that is the truth. You can say, whatever you like about this, the Israelis don't have the right to exist or whatever. You're just spewing forth anti-Jewish hatred when you say that. You can say that Israel doesn't have the right to occupy Gaza. Well, Israel didn't occupy Gaza from 2005 when it left Gaza. And you can say, well, Israel occupies it practically by controlling the power supply and the water and the borders and the sea blockade and all that. Well, again, Israel did not impose any blockade on Gaza until Hamas took over violently. Even though they won an election, they still had a violent coup against Fatah because Fatah was not willing to accept the results of the election because it wasn't a majority of the election and whatever. So there was essentially a kind of civil war, and Hamas took control. And then immediately, I don't know what part you missed there, but people have been long saying, oh, the rockets have been firing ever since Hamas took control of Gaza. The fact is, the rockets have been firing long before Hamas actually took control. They were being fired by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Palestinian Authority terrorist forces since Arafat's launched the second Intifada when he rejected the Y Accords in 2000 and on the lie that the second Intifada was launched because Ariel Sharon went to visit Temple Mount, which is the holiest site in Judaism, but for some reason he's not allowed to go there. So they used that as an excuse to launch the second Intifada, and in so doing they also began firing rockets from Gaza into Israel. So the rockets were firing before Hamas took over. When Hamas took over, it just got worse, right? In fact, the rockets firing into Gaza is one of the reasons that Israel said, all right, enough of this madness. Let's just pull out of Gaza, give them their land, and see if they'll make peace. See if they'll lead to a better existence for themselves and for us and for everybody. And of course it did not. This engagement was a strategic move. You could argue it was a wise move. You could argue it was a foolish move. Either way, it gave the Palestinians in Gaza an opportunity to make a real peace and a prosperous land. And of course, they refused to do that. Instead, they just launched the next phase of the war. And there were many fake agreements of ceasefires and truces, which the Palestinians called Hudna, which is just a fake, literally a fake ceasefire. Right? That's the definition of it, is a fake ceasefire in which the power, the side that doesn't have the power agrees to stop attacking the side that has the power, and openly saying, we are doing this falsely just to gather our forces again, and we will continue attacking you as soon as we are able to. And they had a number of those Hudna ceasefire agreements that led to just more conflict and war. And now, October 7th, 2023 happened, and this new phase in the war happened. And it should surprise no one that the result is that Israel has gone into a war against the Hamas, and its aims are to get rid of the Hamas from controlling the Gaza Strip and to retrieve all of its hostages, all of the Israelis who have been held captive since the beginning of the war. Well, of course, because of the international forces of pressure, political pressure, diplomatic pressure, economic pressure, etc., you have tons and tons of countries, especially those who openly hate Israel, even though they pretend not to, pressuring Israel to accept a ceasefire. Now, interestingly, you will notice that even in the Arab world, until very recently, when Saudi Arabia said, no, we won't make peace with Israel until there's a plan for Palestinian statehood, although days before October 7th, they were ready to sign peace with Israel, but they couldn't once the war launched, because they had to pretend once again that they care about the Palestinian cause more than peace with Israel. Nevertheless, you have other countries that already have peace with Israel who have maintained their peace with Israel. And what does that tell you? That tells you that they intend to remain at peace with Israel because they see the political, strategic, and economic advantages of doing so. And even the United Arab Emirates has said, we don't side with the Hamas on this. The Hamas is to blame. This is a ridiculous ongoing war that they are perpetuating, and they should stop fighting in order to make peace and get the advantages of peace for their people. But the UAE realizes that the Hamas does not want to do this, and that's why they have openly and staunchly defended their peace treaty with Israel and maintained it for the purpose of, strengthening the peace that they've signed with Israel since the Abraham Accords. So, what happens when goals don't match reality? Well, you need to either shift your goals or make your reality match them as much as possible. And how can you or you need to accept that you've just simply failed. If you're going to simply accept that you failed, well, that's one way of doing it. And to date, 75 years into Israel's modern history, since its reestablishment as a state in 1948, it has been demonstrated that Israel has continually accepted the failure to achieve its goals. Now, Israel has achieved many amazing goals in 75 years, but peace with the Palestinians, right? The Arabs that call themselves Palestinians since 1964, 1967, that has not been achieved. And the only reason it has not been achieved is because the Palestinians have refused to accept it. And to be fair, there have also been some people in Israeli leadership, and there continue to be people in Israeli leadership, who also have their reasons to want to prolong this war. Yet the overwhelming majority of the people, especially Palestinians and Israelis, do want to have a peace. However, now it may not be the overwhelming majority of Palestinians, but the overwhelming majority of Israelis do still want to have peace. The problem is, how do you achieve it when there is constant conflict and warfare? And the answer is, there needs to be an overwhelming decisive victory for one side to win and the other side to accept, to surrender and accept peace. And the only way that's going to happen is if Israel wins. Because if the Palestinians win, there will not be an Israel. They've said that openly. The Hamas has said it openly. They will destroy Israel and kill every Jew and every Israeli. And then they will pursue their goal of killing every Jew around the world and attack other countries like the United States and European countries, etc., which they've already done many times, and they will continue to do that in increasing numbers. So the reality is that, practically speaking, right, the Israelis have to win this war, and that means that the Palestinians have to surrender or be destroyed, defeated in an outright military victory. And that can only happen if the Israelis decide to win the damn war, right? Which is a kinetic decision that they need to make. Can it be done? Sure. Will it be done? That's very difficult to say, and at the moment it looks more and more unlikely, and we're going to head into another long period of conflict between Israelis and, people that call themselves Palestinians now, since 40 years, 50 years. And that means that this is going to be yet another chapter of unfinished business if that happens. And that means that we are likely to see yet another flare-up once this particular chapter eventually dies down with some kind of fake diplomatic agreement that is only going to allow the Palestinians to regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again. So, as I said from the outset, this war will likely not end the way its protagonists or its belligerents have said it would, and that is essentially what is happening. It is going to end differently, probably, unless there is a severe change of direction in the leadership of Israel, and unless they actually allow the army to win the war. What does that mean? There's a whole lot that means, and stay tuned for details. I'll be sure to update here as it becomes relevant. And until then, I wish you all peace and good tidings. Cheers.